Okay, let's get into this. We need you for a moment to completely just overhaul your mental map of 18th century London.
It's a great place to start because you have to picture the coffee houses absolutely buzzing with some of the sharpest minds in Europe.
Right.
You've got the intellectual heavyweights of the Royal Society meeting up at Crane Court, and they're arguing, intensely over Newtonian mechanics, debating optics, charting the heavens.
And at the same time, across town, you have the social elite, the beau monde.
Yes, convening at the salons of the Blue Stocking Circle. You've got these incredible figures like Mrs. Montague and Mrs. Vesey leading discussions, trading philosophical quips, and really advancing the whole concept of enlightenment.
It's a time of extreme intellectual light, isn't it? But what if all that brilliance, all that high society maneuvering, was actually just a thin, elegant shield?
A veneer.
Exactly. What if beneath the paved streets, below the ancient boundary of the city wall, an entirely different, far older struggle was playing out. A struggle for survival fought by beings of pure myth, the Fae of the Onyx Court.
And that is precisely our mission for this deep dive. We're going to cut right through that polite veneer of Georgian London to explore its secret history.
We were focusing on the fairy realm of the Onyx Court.
And the existential threat they faced. A literal ticking cosmic clock tied to the return of Halley's Comet and the shocking necessary alliance they had to forge with mortals, with mortal science, and with those very blue-stocking social circles just to survive.
We have a really deep well of information here covering the volatile politics, the unforgettable personalities, and the incredibly specific scientific and magical maneuvers they undertook.
Yeah, this narrative spans over 50 years. It starts with the Seer's warning around 1705, and it takes us all the way through the climax, the big events of 1759.
So where do we begin? I think it has to be with the foundational structure of this secret government.
It has to be, because this isn't your typical, isolated mythological kingdom. The Onyx Court is ruled by a profound duality, which is absolutely necessary for its existence.
Yeah.
You have the fairy sovereign, Queen Lune, who represents the realm's innate magical energy, its destiny.
And then you have her mortal counterpart.
Yes, the Prince of the Stone. This mortal figure is essential. They act as the literal bridge and sort of the buffer between the ephemeral Fae world and the solid, increasingly material world of mankind.
Immortality is the anchor.
It's the anchor. It's what the Fae need to prevent their entire world from just, dissolving into the ether. This duality is non-negotiable for the Hall's survival.
And who was holding this incredibly high-pressure secret portfolio in the mid-1750s?
That was Galen St. Clair, and he was the perfect young, gentlemanly representative of his era, educated, enthusiastic, very socially adept.
So on one hand, he's navigating this really intense social and intellectual landscape.
Totally. He's listening to Dr. Samuel Johnson pontificate on morality. He's exchanging pleasantries with the intellectual powerhouse, Mrs. Montague, at her parties.
He's completely immersed in that elegant world of wigs and philosophical debate.
Exactly. And then the next moment, he is holding the secrets, the authority, and, potentially the entire fate of the Onyx Hall on his shoulders.
The duality of his life must have been staggering.
It's unbelievable. One night, he's discussing the latest volume of poetry with Delphia Northwood, and the next, he's locked in a subterranean chamber debating elemental transmutation with the dwarves and a genie.
Wow.
And his ability to just seamlessly transition between those worlds made him indispensable, but also, as we'll see, prone to some deep personal conflict.
That transition brings us directly to the physical reality of the hall itself. We need to descend now, literally, into the city's hidden heart.
We do, because where the Fae lived and how their kingdom was constructed is crucial to understanding the threat they were facing.
So the Onyx Hall, what does it look like?
It's vast, it's sprawling, and it's deliberately hidden beneath the modern city structure. An enormous complex of halls, chambers, gardens, a real rabbit warren of ancient magic and bureaucratic offices.
And the entrances, I'm guessing, are masked by the absolutely ordinary.
Of course. Give us an example. If you were Galen, how would you punch in for work?
One of the key entrances was described as being through the back wall of a completely unremarkable pawnbroker shop.
Perfect.
You'd step into this small, cramped alcove, say the single secret word, downward, and the floor would simply drop away, depositing you right into the fairy realm.
The decides had to be perfect because Londoners are observant. But who notices the back wall of a pawnbroker's?
It's the perfect camouflage.
Yeah.
But here is the critical and frankly terrifying structural detail.
Yeah, this is key.
The hall's physical integrity, its very existence, is tied directly magically to the physical boundaries of mortal London.
Specifically, the ancient wall of the City of London. It's a concept of magical sympathy and reflection. The Onyx Hall is the reflection of the ancient enclosed city.
So if the mortal city is stable and walled, the hall is strong.
But as mortals started seeing the wall as an impediment to commerce and progress, as something to be demolished, the consequences below were immediate and catastrophic.
So when Londoners, say, decide to tear down a section of the wall near Bishopsgate to improve the flow of cart traffic, what happens to the Fae Kingdom?
It causes fraying. The structure of the hall itself begins to literally dissolve.
So it's not a metaphor.
Not at all. One of the sprites, Dame Erith, who we'll discuss later, she returned after 50 years away and went looking for her old chambers. They were gone, simply missing. Mortal urban renewal was causing chambers to become unstable, or in some cases just wink out of existence entirely.
It's the ultimate anti-magic municipal development.
I know, that completely flips the script on what an existential threat looks like. It's not just a dragon, it's the 18th century equivalent of a building permit.
Every brick torn down by mortal Londoners was a physical, existential attack on the realm right beneath their feet.
And that realm, the Onyx Court, was incredibly complex. It was a functioning, diverse government.
You had Queen Lune, of course.
And the chief political figure, Lord Keeper Valentin Aspel. Sprites like the aforementioned Dame Erith, practical, grounding brownies like the good means, and a fascinating array of non-European mythological figures.
We're talking more than just standard high fantasy figures, right?
Absolutely. The court included the Vondosticken dwarves Nicholas, perpetually ill-tempered and pessimistic.
There's always one.
And Wilhus, the pragmatic, good-tempered counterpart. They served as the chief engineers and crafters. But then you have figures like Catestes, a centaur, said to be the grandson of Chiron, serving as the court architect.
Incredible.
And perhaps most critically to the scientific dilemma, the genie Abd Rashid, a specialist in elemental theory who came to the court from Istanbul. This was truly a global convergence of myth, all dedicated to the survival of one city.
And this motley, crumbling court was living under a looming, predictable shadow.
The Dragon's Comet.
Yes. This wasn't a secret, sudden invasion, was it?
No, not at all. The threat started with a specific seer's warning way back in 1705, when the last predicted return of the comet was studied.
A comet known to carry a powerful fairy entity called the Dragon.
Right. It was known as the Dragon because it was believed to embody pure, destructive, volatile fire, a creature of the ether.
And the knowledge of its return was tied directly to Halley's famous calculations, wasn't it? He'd observed the comet in 1682 and accurately predicted its return.
Precisely. The Fae had the best possible scientific intelligence on their enemy. Halley's Comet was, for them, literally the vessel of doom.
So they knew the deadline.
They did. As of 1757, Galen was acutely aware of the time pressure. He calculated they had a year and a half, maybe less, until the Dragon would complete its approach and make its leap from the comet, descending upon London. It was a race against astrophysics.
Which takes us back to 1682, the last sighting. If they knew it was coming, they must have had a defensive strategy back then. What did that look like?
In 1682, they implemented a plan that was already a radical blending of their two worlds. They collaborated with the then Prince of the Stone, Jack Ellen, and they used the mortal infrastructure of the newly built Royal Observatory at Greenwich.
The domain of the first astronomer royal, John Flamsteed.
Yes, and I can only imagine how annoyed Flamsteed must have been, a known stickler for precision, having Fae running around his new instruments.
I'm sure. Our sources suggest Flamsteed was probably very annoyed, or at least bewildered, by the unexplained activity and the request for constant, highly specific positional data.
But the Fae needed mortal precision. Their defense was brilliant. They engineered the dragon's previous exile onto the comet itself.
How do you exile a hyper-powerful fairy entity onto a passing celestial body?
They used a revolutionary inverted telescope. This was no ordinary instrument. It was crafted from fairy wood, reinforced with precisely milled mortal metals. It was a fusion of magic and engineering.
And it wasn't used to observe the comet.
No, it was used to focus and direct the dragon's volatile spirit through the ether, pushing it out into the distant, cold darkness of the comet's tail.
It was essentially a 75-year holding pattern.
Exactly. It trapped the dragon's spirit for the duration of the orbit. But, and this is the vital distinction, it was exile, not annihilation. It was a temporary solution that bought them time.
And now in the 1750s, the dragon was coming back. And they knew the same trick wouldn't work twice.
They needed a permanent solution, and that required Galen's unique mortal perspective.
This brings us to the core of the problem, and the core of Galen St. Clair's unique role. As Queen Lune made clear to him, without your people, we would not be here.
They were at the absolute limit of fairy magic.
The Fae world operates on instinct, tradition, enchantment.
Right. But when you're faced with a repeatable, predictable celestial threat like Halley's Comet, you need something you lack: natural philosophy. You need the modal principles of observation, repeatable experimentation, and rigor to understand the laws governing your own supernatural reality.
So Galen's mission was to apply the Enlightenment to fairy survival. But how does a polite gentleman convince serious, skeptical minds of the Royal Society that they need to stop looking at microscopes and start looking at pixies?
It required incredible discretion and very targeted recruitment. Galen went to the centers of mortal knowledge, specifically the Royal Society's home at Onyx Court.
He maneuvered among heavy hitters, like the Earl of Macclesfield.
But he had a specific target: Dr. Rufus Andrews.
Tell us about Dr. Andrews. Why was he the key?
Andrews was the perfect storm of intelligence, desperation, and intellectual curiosity. He was a gentleman scientist, but he was also deeply afflicted by consumption, a slow, wasting illness.
Which gave him a powerful motivation to explore extreme scientific frontiers.
A very powerful motivation. He was intensely interested in living bodies and was desperately seeking a second genius, a discovery that would rival Newton to unlock life's fundamental mysteries.
So Galen sold him the ultimate discovery: the existence of a hidden, living world whose laws he could unlock. But how did he get Andrews to cross the line from academic curiosity to, acceptance?
He had to shock him. Once Andrews was brought down to the Onyx Hall, the theoretical discussions ended and the rigorous, often horrifying experimentation began. One key incident involved studying a captive elemental salamander, a creature of pure fire. Andrews observed it, his sparks and flame, conducting experiments that proved Fae were fundamentally different from mortal life.
He even performed the experimentum crucis.
Yes, a demonstration that isolates a single phenomenon on a Fae prisoner, no less, to prove to Andrews that their chemical makeup was fundamentally elemental.
That is dark, necessary science.
It is, and these shocking observations led the Fae away from astronomy and deeper into the dark arts of alchemy and elemental chemistry.
Because astronomy had failed to provide a permanent solution.
Correct. They needed to understand the enemy's makeup, and the genie, Abd ar-Rashid, provided the theoretical framework.
What was his theory?
Based on his knowledge of elemental myth, he proposed that fairies were not flesh and blood, but complex mixtures of the classical elements: earth, water, air, and fire.
And crucially, he posited that the queen and the Fae nobility were created out of smokeless fire.
Let's pause on that. Smokeless fire. What does that mean in alchemical terms, and how does that relate to the dragon?
Well, in the 18th century alchemical tradition, fire was often associated with volatility and spirit. Smokeless fire suggests a purified, ethereal, state-pure energy unburdened by material residue.
And the dragon, being this massive fairy entity born on a comet, was analyzed as being almost entirely this pure, volatile spirit.
Which brings us to the philosopher's stone plan, the peace stone.
Exactly. And the goal is not traditional gold, but transformation. They analyzed the dragon's spirit, powerful, destructive, but disembodied as pure, sophic sulfur.
Sulfur representing the fiery masculine principle.
And it was determined that the dragon lacked a stable body, the final component necessary to root it in reality, often called the ether.
And according to the logic of the chemical wedding required for the peace stone, what was the missing component needed to stabilize and thus transform the dragon?
The opposing principle, a sophic mercury. Mercury represents the volatile, feminine, life-giving principle necessary to unite with the sulfur.
And
Tragically, this principle was identified as emanating directly and uniquely from the queen herself, Lune the Moon Queen. She was the purest source of the transformative element they needed.
So the scientific conclusion, based on Dr. Andrews' rigor and Abd ar-Rashid's elemental theory, was that saving the realm required the complete dissolution, the total sacrifice of the queen.
Yes, the plan meant extracting this volatile principle, the sophic mercury, from Lune. This would effectively separate her from her sovereignty, her very being, and theoretically neutralize the dragon by stabilizing it into something inert. It was the ultimate horrifying scientific dilemma.
And this is where Galen St. Clair, the perfect gentleman, stops being the curious scientist and starts being the protector.
It's the pivotal moment of the entire deep dive. Galen drew a fierce, unwavering line in the sand. He absolutely forbade any action that would physically or fundamentally harm Lune.
His personal devotion overruled the scientific conclusion. He refused the cost.
He did, which immediately halts the Peastone Plan and changes the entire scientific mandate. The problem is no longer how to sacrifice Lune.
But how to find a substitute for her uniquely powerful Sophic Mercury?
Exactly. The dilemma transforms from a purely magical or scientific one into a moral, political, and engineering challenge. They had the formula, but the main ingredient was off-limits due to Galen's devotion. This refusal later became central to the internal political crisis.
As Galen is struggling with the moral geometry of the Peastone, the court itself is actively being eaten away, not just by the crumbling walls above, but by internal politics.
We need to analyze the Sanist movement.
This is the internal decay, right? And it drew its power directly from the external threats, the comet and the fraying hall.
They played on fear and tradition, and the one spearheading this political revolt.
The Lord Keeper, Valentin Aspel.
A powerful, established elf in the court, and he used his position to secretly lead the Sanists. Their argument was powerful and designed to appeal to faerie tradition. Lune was failing to do her duty.
Because the hall was actively crumbling under her reign, and the comet was coming back for the second time.
Exactly. And they weren't calling for outright murder, were they? It was more subtle than that.
They were seeking a more palatable form of usurpation.
A political solution. They wanted Lune replaced by a new, stronger sovereign, or perhaps exiled, or even sacrificed, but only as a necessary act of duty to divert the dragon, not an act of malice.
Aspel masterfully used the force of popular opinion and the weight of faerie tradition.
He was capitalizing on the fear that the court was losing its physical grip on reality, and the London Stone was the proof in their argument, wasn't it?
It was their smoking gun. The London Stone, that visible block of limestone now sitting discreetly on Cannon Street, was magically considered the heart of the Onyx Hall, the ultimate site of all faerie oaths.
So when mortals decided to relocate that physical stone, moving it just a few feet to the north side of Cannon Street, it didn't just inconvenience the Fae.
It shattered their integrity.
It dramatically weakened the hall's integrity below. The spiritual tether was strained, the fraying accelerated, and the Sanists had concrete evidence to fuel their complaints.
Look how weak our queen is. Even mortal street sweepers can destroy our kingdom.
Precisely. Now, into this volatile political situation steps Dame Aerith, a key figure who had deliberately removed herself from court politics for 5 decades.
Aerith is our perfect internal spy. She's a sprite and a lady knight, but she had lived wisely for 50 years in the Vale of the White Horse, far away from London's court vipers.
She was driven back by duty to Lune, but she carried immense skepticism. What made her perspective so valuable?
She was an outsider who remembered the old days, so she could see the current rot with fresh eyes. She was so disgusted by the political maneuvering that she openly questioned if the hall was worth preserving at all.
But her loyalty to Lune, the person, was absolute.
It was, and she quickly became suspicious of Aspel. She became the one who uncovered the true depth of his treason.
She began spying. She attended a secret Sanist meeting and realized the political maneuvering was far darker than mere succession planning.
Aspel wasn't just planning to replace Lune.
He was planning to separate her from her realm, the very action that would make the Peastone extraction, Galen's forbidden plan, surgically feasible.
So Aerith recognized that Aspel was waiting for the perfect moment to weaponize Andrew's science against the Queen.
She did. She was the one who reported this treason directly to Lune and later to Galen, forcing them to accelerate their defense.
The pressure is reaching catastrophic levels. External threat, internal betrayal, and Galen's moral roadblock. And amidst all this, the court has access to a completely unreal resource.
The calendar room.
This room is one of the most incredible details of the Onyx Hall. A literal temporal anomaly stumbled upon by Aerith after she noticed inconsistencies in the Centarctist's maps of the fraying areas.
What exactly did the calendar room contain?
It housed the 11 skip days of time from when Great Britain adopted the Gregorian calendar in September 1752.
Right, when the country jumped from September 2nd to September 14th.
Those 11 days didn't simply vanish. They were magically preserved in the hall's deepest recesses. It became a pocket of time out of time, an area of massively accelerated temporal flow.
So if you spent a day in there, how long would pass in the outside world?
The time differential was extreme. It allowed for instantaneous experimentation. And this is where the Tickin dwarves, Willis and Nicholas, were primarily working.
They used the accelerated time to craft and test their ultimate dragon cage design. Nicholas, the grumpy one, famously complained that the room was only useful if you didn't have to constantly pop back out to Crane Court to fetch more supplies.
Because those trips negated the time advantage.
Right. But using that manipulated time came with profound risks, especially for mortals.
The risks were disastrous. The cautionary tale was former Prince of the Stone, Hamilton Birch. He only reigned for 6 years, but spent significant time in the calendar room trying to solve a crisis.
And when he emerged,
He was Snow White, physically aged, and effectively burnt out. It proved that manipulated time was deeply damaging to the mortal body and soul.
yet Galen St. Clair went in there anyway, knowing the risk.
He had to. He spent time there preparing himself mentally and scientifically for the final conflict, and he emerged much older in mind, hardened by the accelerated knowledge and stress, but physically unchanged.
What was the difference between him and Birch?
The theory went that Galen consciously left his youthful, volatile fire, his ambition, and his recklessness behind. He channeled his energy into devotion and logic. This experience in the Time Vault was essential for developing his eventual, final, and truly mortal plan.
With the Peace Stone plan stalled and the threat rapidly approaching, the Queen's allies needed to buy time. That led to Plan A, the Cloud Veil.
This was Irit's pragmatic proposal, wasn't it? A temporary defense based on concealment.
Exactly. If the dragon, a creature of sight and fire, couldn't see London or Britain from the comet, it couldn't make the final leap to target the realm. The goal was to blanket the city, or ideally the entire island, in a permanent atmospheric cover.
That sounds like a monumental task, even for high-level magic. How did they actually implement hiding an entire country?
It was a fascinating fusion of diplomacy, procurement, and ritual. First, they required a major magical pact with ancient entities. They had to strike a deal with Greek wind spirits to ensure reliable, coordinated atmospheric conditions.
And second, they needed a physical focus for the magic.
A specific mirrored bowl procured through the genie Abd ar-Rashid from a Dutch Jew specializing in esoteric crafts. This was key, as the bowl needed to reflect the celestial sphere in a very particular way.
And the location had to be Greenwich again, the heart of mortal time and observation.
Precisely. The complex ritual was performed at the Royal Observatory. This location physically tied the magic to the island's geographical and temporal framework.
Describe the ritual itself. It must have been quite a spectacle.
It was a beautiful, grand fairy ceremony with the most serious purpose imaginable. It involved nephilae, which are cloud nymphs dressed in robes of swirling mist and fog.
And they used will-o'-the-wisps.
Yes, those small, volatile marshlights as portable sources of pure, contained, elemental fire. The mirrored bowl was used to reflect the sky inward, focusing the magical energy, which was then directed upward by the nephilae, sending massive shrouds of magical mist toward the heavens.
Essentially an atmospheric shield created by coordinated mythological effort.
And it worked. It successfully concealed Button from the dragon's sight, temporarily delaying the impending leap. It bought Galen and the dwarves the precious time they needed to finalize Plan B.
While high magic is temporarily saving Britain, Galen is still a gentleman in 18th century London, dealing with his mortal constraints.
Namely, the pressure from his father, Charles St. Clair, to marry strategically.
This is a huge personal conflict for him. His family fortune was flagging, and society expected him to marry a woman of wealth. But beyond financial necessity, Galen needed intellectual companionship.
And he found that in Delphia Northwood, or Philadelphia, a woman of great fortune, but more importantly, of brilliant intellect, who secretly published philosophical and literary works under a pen name.
He had his queen, Lune, to whom he was deeply devoted, but he was attempting to secure a future with a mortal woman. That devotion to Lune must have felt like a profound betrayal to his future wife.
Absolutely. He felt that his secret life, his daily devotion to Lune in the hall, was a form of unfaithfulness to any mortal wife who couldn't know.
He initially tried to keep his two lives entirely separate.
But he had recently made a mistake by exposing Dr. Andrews to the faerie world without proper psychological warning, and he realized carrying such a tremendous secret would poison and eventually destroy his marriage.
He didn't want the deceit to crumble the foundation of his mortal world, just as the walls were crumbling the foundation of the Fae world.
That's the exact connection. So Galen, determined not to have secrets anymore, made a radical choice that defied all 18th century social norms.
What did he do?
Instead of a discreet engagement, he staged a highly unusual, dramatic, and chaotic encounter with Dame Erith right before the wedding. He used Erith to reveal the fairy world to Delphia, forcing her to confront the absolute truth of his dual existence.
What was the reaction of this intelligent, wealthy, blue-stocking adjacent woman. Shock. Fear.
Quite the opposite. Delphia's response was not fear, but fierce demand for inclusion. She accepted the marriage immediately, recognizing that his commitment to the hidden world was the defining feature of his courage and character.
But she had a condition.
A sharp and powerful one. The secret belonged to me as well as you. Take me to the Onyx Hall.
Wow.
She refused to be merely the wife of a gentleman. She demanded to be a partner in the secret world, recognizing that knowledge was power and she intended to share it. This act of acceptance transformed Galen's sacrifice from a solitary burden into a shared mission.
Even with the cloud veil successfully deployed and Galen married, the window was closing fast. The astronomical community, mortal or fae, couldn't stop the clock.
The threat became absolutely undeniable in public. The comet was spotted by Plich in Saxony in January 1759, confirming its return ahead of time. Then Messier cited it publicly in Paris.
The news was out. The deadline was upon them.
And this final, immense external pressure caused the internal threats to converge in the ultimate double betrayal involving Aspel and Dr. Andrews.
Aspel, the Sanus leader, knew this was his last chance.
And he exploited Dr. Andrews' greatest weakness, his deteriorating health. Andrews' consumption was worsening, and he became desperate. He saw the Peace Stone, which he had helped analyze, as his only final hope for a cure way to transform his sick body.
And Aspel used that desperation to push Andrews to the ultimate betrayal.
He convinced Andrews to attempt the forced extraction of Lune's Sophic mercury, effectively leveraging mortal science to achieve the Sanus goal of sacrificing the queen. The stakes were no longer political. They were life and death, both for the queen and for Andrews.
How was this plan discovered?
Irith, ever vigilant, followed Aspel's movements. She tracked him to a secret hideout in Red Lion Square, and what she discovered there was truly horrifying and provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy.
She found a makeshift laboratory.
A grotesque magical and alchemical laboratory, and the horrifying scientific evidence.
She found the dissected body of a fae courtier named Cevenus, who had scholarly inclinations, likely used for experimentation.
And the beginnings of a complex alchemical apparatus designed explicitly for the volatile, high-stakes extraction ritual. It was clear proof. Aspel and Andrews were working together to sacrifice Lune immediately.
This forced Galen's hand. He knew the extraction had to be stopped, and he realized the fatal flaw in all their attempts to deal with the dragon so far.
The flaw was the Fae's separation of spirit and body. The dragon was pure spirit. For the Fae, killing the body did not kill the spirit, it merely freed it.
The inverted telescope in 1682 only exiled the spirit.
Right. To annihilate the dragon, you had to kill a mind. And Fae spirits are immortal and unkillable.
But Galen, the mortal prince, found the way out by exploiting mortality itself.
It was a brutal, beautiful, and fundamentally mortal piece of logic. Galen's ultimate plan, refined in the accelerated time of the calendar room, was to take the dragon's immense, unkillable spirit and bind it into a mortal vessel.
A mortal body could be killed.
And if the dragon's spirit was anchored to a vessel that could suffer annihilation, then the dragon itself could be annihilated.
And knowing the power required and the danger, there was only one vessel he could trust.
Himself. Galen offered himself as the vessel. He justified it to his allies as the ultimate act of courage, the only way that could permanently secure the realm.
But Irith, knowing the theological fate of those who take their own lives in the 18th century, called it what it was.
Suicide. The moral weight of this decision was immense, even necessary. The ritual was set up immediately. They needed a location that sat directly on the confluence of power.
They chose a heavily shielded chamber beneath the monument to the Great Fire of London.
That's a powerful metaphor, dealing with a fiery celestial threat beneath a monument commemorating an earthly catastrophe of fire.
It was deliberate. The monument was chosen because it sat directly above the calendar room, linking the magical time vault below with the sky above.
So Galen entered the chamber, stripped of his elaborate, elegant gentleman's armor, his fine clothes, ready to receive the dragon's essence. Lune, dressed in white mourning, watched from a distance.
And how did the physical binding work?
They focused the dragon's fiery essence, traveling on the comet's light using a special telescope and a mirror. This power was directed down the monument's central pillar and into Galen's prepared mortal body.
The result was immediate and catastrophic.
Galen screamed as the immense volatile dragon's essence entered him, but the power was simply too vast for even his prepared mortal shell to contain. It was an unstable anchor.
So the dragon's essence, seeking a way to stabilize, failed to remain in Galen's burning body.
Instead, it traveled rapidly down the central pillar through the calendar room and burst out into the Onyx Hall, now possessing Galen's form.
The dragon, wearing Galen's familiar face, fled the Onyx Hall. Where did it seek to establish its new terrifying domain?
The London Stone on Cannon Street, the exact weakened heart of the Onyx Hall, where the Fae and mortal worlds converge most violently.
And Irith, who had witnessed the ritual's horrifying partial success, followed the possessed Galen into the streets of the city.
She immediately recognized that the dragon was weakened and destabilized by its mortal prison, but still dangerously seeking to establish its realm. And this leads to the agonizing final confrontation.
Irith confronted the possessed Galen on Cannon Street. She knew what had to be done.
To save London, to save the Queen, she had to commit the agonizing act of killing the mortal man she respected, thereby annihilating the dragon bound within him.
She carried a weapon specifically designed for this purpose.
An ice pike, hafted with cold, anti-magical Jotun ice. She had to commit the murder to prevent the suicide from being in vain.
And so she did.
Yes. She stabbed Galen, killing the mortal vessel and annihilating the dragon's spirit. The act cost her dearly. She reflected later that had she truly loved him in the way a mortal does, she never could have committed the necessary, pragmatic sacrifice.
The cost was immense, but the realm was saved. The dragon was gone forever. How did the survivors process the sacrifice of their Prince of the Stone?
Galen St. Clair received unique honors in death. He was interred not in a mortal cemetery, but in the night garden of the Onyx Hall beside Michael Devon.
The only two princes of the stone buried there.
It signified that they were not merely mortal counterparts, but beings who had achieved a deep, fundamental spiritual bond with Lune and the realm itself.
But the story of Galen St. Clair wasn't quite finished. In the midst of the morning, his ghost appeared in the chambers.
A ghost, yes, but one unburdened of the dragon's fire and critically unburdened of the pain of his death. This appearance provided the crucial theological closure necessary to negate the sanest arguments of suicide.
And Delphia, now the widow St. Clair, provided that closure. What was her intellectual and spiritual justification for his death?
She cited scripture, reminding Irith and the court that giving up one's life for others is the greatest love of all. This interpretation redefined Galen's action, saving his soul from the traditional condemnation of suicide and allowing his spirit to remain whole and unburdened, bound to the hall.
So he couldn't completely depart the realm he saved.
Galen's ghost remained bound to the hall, realizing that while the immediate dragon threat was eliminated, the underlying problem, the fraying integrity caused by the crumbling mortal boundaries, remained. He couldn't abandon the realm in its vulnerable state.
He was a bridge in life, and now a tether in death.
And this final act of loyalty secured his lasting institutional gift to the court. Lune, recognizing that the alliance Galen forged was the true source of their survival, granted his final wish.
The establishment of the Galenic Academy.
A formal society open to both mortals and fae, dedicated to the rigorous study of the intersection between their two worlds. It was a way to formalize the reliance on natural philosophy that saved them.
It moved the relationship from secret collaboration to formal, ongoing intellectual partnership.
And Galen's intellectual legacy was secured by the perfect patron, Lady Delphia St. Clair, the sharp, insightful widow. She ensured that Galen's role as the indispensable bridge between the elegant world of the Bluestockings and the subterranean world of the Fae would continue through rigorous research and mutual understanding.
And the ultimate confirmation that the Great Sacrifice worked.
We fast forward to 1782, when Halley's Comet made its next predicted return. It was observed by a new generation of academics, mortals who were often members of the Galenic Academy, like the scholar Frederick. To them, the comet was simply a historical curiosity.
The dragon was gone. The threat was secured.
And London continued its business, safe in the knowledge gifted by a Prince of the Stone who mastered both science and self-sacrificial love.
So what we dove into today was a story of ultimate survival, where fate was literally written in the stars. The return of Halley's Comet was inevitable. But that fate was defied not by greater magic, but by the intellectual collaboration between disparate groups.
The most potent defense was not pure fae power or pure mortal science in isolation, but the willingness to blend them.
Applying mortal logic, Galen's realization that the dragon needed a mortal anchor to be truly killed, and the ultimate selfless sacrifice born of devotion to a realm that wasn't even his own species.
It illustrates how the deepest, most critical knowledge necessary for survival often comes from the most unexpected pairings.
Whether it's high society ladies arguing philosophy in drawing rooms, Or an elemental sprite working with a consumption-riddled doctor, a grumpy dwarf, and a centaur architect in a chamber where time folds in on itself.
The strength of the Onyx Hall wasn't its magical stone. It was the human capacity for self-sacrificial love and the willingness to integrate knowledge.
The Fairy Court was struggling to survive because its physical connection to the mortal world, London's ancient wall, was crumbling.
But Galen proved that the real unfraying foundation of the Onyx Hall was not stone or pure magic, but the necessary, enduring alliance forged by human virtue and intellect.
So we leave you with this provocative thought. Considering Galen's story, what mortal institution are you a part of today that might have an equally powerful, hidden, and necessary twin world beneath it? And perhaps the secret to your own institution's long-term survival lies in forming an intellectual alliance with a world you never even knew existed.
Keep digging, keep connecting the pieces of the world you inhabit. We'll see you on the next deep dive.